I don't care much about all this talk of a ceasefire. It just doesn't matter very much. The Russians have made it unequivocally clear you're not going to get a meaningful ceasefire until all the pieces of a meaningful peace agreement are in place. The Russians would be crazy to agree to a ceasefire of any consequence at this point in time. And they have said that over and over. So we have all this discourse back and forth about ceasefire this and ceasefire that, but it just doesn't matter very much. What matters is whether or not Trump and Putin are moving towards agreement on the basic three Russian demands that have to underpin any meaningful peace agreement. And we have hardly any information on what kind of progress they have made with regard to these three Russian demands. So who knows where we are?
Well, there's a lot of people that will chime up in that, and they want to give different versions of where they think we are. Let's start in France. France 24, one of their English language media sites, is saying, one of the bigger problems that, and this is going to be echoed by others also, and this is throughout the West really, but these are good examples of what the common thinking is of many in Europe, is that you can't trust Putin. So you can't trust the paper this is written on because he never keeps his word. Here's one actually about, first of all, the country of Georgia from 2008.
When it comes to these ceasefires and international agreements, is there any reason to believe he's negotiating in good faith now?
Once again, not to be glib, but no. Look, skeptics who look at Putin's record over the past quarter century say that the pattern is crystal clear. Ceasefires are not peace deals. They are stalling tactics. They are a record of buying time, weakening opponents, and extracting concessions. Look, you can make a list of 10 or 20. I chose 4 or 5. Georgia war. There was an EU-brokered ceasefire. What happened after it was signed? Russian forces continued to advance and occupy Georgia's breakaway territories of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Putin essentially ignored the deal while claiming to do anything but.
So there's going to be some factual issues here. First of all, this whole thing about what happened in 2008 is a little different than what he portrays here, especially with actions taken by Saakashvili. How do you view that?
I think that's true. I mean, I think what's going on here, Danny, is that as part of the giant, and I think that's a good word, giant propagandizing effort in the West to portray Putin as the bad guy at every turn, what we have is a situation where individuals get on television or go on a particular show and they tell a story where Putin is blamed for everything bad that's happened. I mean, you see this especially with regard to the Minsk Accords, which is on that list that the gentleman just put up on the screen, right? The Russians are seen as the ultimate bad guys with regard to Minsk. But I think if you look at what happened in the Minsk negotiations, it's very clear that it was the Ukrainians, the Germans, and the French who were duplicitous, not the Russians. And I think you can make a similar case with almost all of these other instances. But that's not the story you get in the West, because what the West wants to tell everybody is that Putin is the ultimate bad guy and he can't be trusted. But let's assume that's true. He can't be trusted. Well, let's assume all of this propaganda is true. He can't be trusted. So what are we going to do? We're not going to cut a deal with him. We're just going to continue the war that we're losing. More Ukrainians are going to get killed. They're going to lose more territory because we can't trust Putin. The problem here, Danny, is we have no cards to play. So in a very important way, we have no choice but to trust Putin.
Yeah, I want to. You just mentioned the issue with the Minsk Accords, but I still want to show, because I want people to see how it's being portrayed by the West, because he went on to talk specifically about the Minsk Agreement.
Now, this is really the mother of all violations. This is what the skeptics point to today with regard to the current talks. Minsk agreements, they were actually protocols, Oliver. There was Minsk 1, it's called, and Minsk 2, September of 2014, February 2015. What is it? It was to de-escalate in Donbass in eastern Ukraine. The idea was a ceasefire, the withdrawal of Russian troops and Ukrainian as well, and also heavy equipment, the disarming of illegal groups in the area, and Donetsk and Luhansk, those breakaway rebel provinces, which were helmed by separatist, pro-Russian separatist leaders, they were supposed to be decentralized and part of a negotiated deal for greater autonomy remaining within Ukraine. Minsk put no obligations on Moscow. We know the rest is history. In 2022, Putin recognized the independent republics of Donetsk and Luhansk.
So I want to poke a hole at that, because of the way it's portrayed there is that it was only Putin who didn't live up to it. You just mentioned specifically about Germany and France and the role that they played. But in my view, and I'd like your answer on this or your comment, is that one of the absolute central parts of the entire agreement, that upon which everything else hinged, to include withdrawals and separation of forces and all that, was the requirement on the Ukraine side to change their constitution so that they gave limited autonomy to the Russian-speaking areas in the eastern part of their countries, which never took place.
I agree with you 100%. That's exactly right. That is the key issue. And it was not an issue that the Russians could act on. It was an issue that only the Ukrainians obviously could act on. And they could never bring themselves to give the people in the Donbass limited autonomy, special status. And therefore, the Minsk Accords were doomed from the get-go. Furthermore, and this is of equal importance, there are four parties involved in the negotiations, the Minsk II negotiations: Ukraine, Russia, obviously, Germany, and France. The German leader, who of course was Angela Merkel, the French leader, who was Francois Hollande, and Peter Poroshenko, who was the Ukrainian leader. All three of those leaders have explicitly admitted that they were not seriously negotiating in the context of the Minsk Accords. They have said that all they were doing was stalling for the purposes of helping Ukraine arm itself so that it could fight the Russians. In fact, Putin is livid about the fact that he was bamboozled by not just the Ukrainians, but by the French and the Germans. Putin was negotiating in good faith. And it was the other three parties who were not negotiating in good faith. And this is one of the principal reasons that the Russians today say they don't trust the West or the Ukrainians as far as they can throw the West or the Ukrainians. So it wasn't the Russians who were playing games here. It was the West and Ukraine.
Well, yeah, I want to continue down the road of something you said a second ago, directly related to what you just said there, is that you have these emphatic statements by these guys. And of course, like I said, this is just symptomatic. This is a simple one. There's tons of others on both sides of the Atlantic. And the people listening to this, of course, they don't, at least not a lot of them, watch the deep dive shows like this. They'll just watch their news or the 3-minute sound bites they get off of a typical package. And that's all they hear. They don't hear the other stuff. So that leads them to say, yeah, let's don't do a deal with that guy. Let's just keep pushing back. Even though, as you pointed out a second ago, there's no cards to play here. We have no alternative other than for Russia to continue fighting until they win. So this seems to me, it is setting us up, our own selves, for real problems coming down the road.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get an agreement if you buy this line of argument that we have to be able to trust Putin and the Russians, and the historical record shows that they can't be trusted, and therefore we have to continue the war. We will continue the war. And of course, this is what most of the foreign policy elite in the West wants to do. They want to continue the war. Trump, of course, is an outlier here. And if you don't get a deal, the war will go on. And as you and I have talked about many times, where's this going to lead? It's going to lead to more Ukrainian deaths. It's going to lead to more Ukrainian territory lost to the Russians. And this is going to be an even bigger catastrophe over time than it already is now. So the bottom line here is you have no choice but to trust the Russians and to try to work out a deal that accommodates them as much as possible so that they have no incentive to invade Ukraine again once you get some sort of peace agreement or some sort of frozen conflict. It's just a reflection of the realities on the ground.